Well, how are you doing? Okay, right. This is going to be called, I think, 2D Globe. LOL. Yeah. What utter nonsense. Anyway, let's get stuck into it. Hopefully, it won't go on too long. Whenever I say that, though, the videos end up being long. Okay, this is the start, right? Is the surface of a sphere two-dimensional? Right? Here we are. Yes, the surface of a sphere is two-dimensional, 2D. Although it exists and is embedded within three-dimensional 3D space, the surface itself is a 2D manifold, meaning only two coordinates such as longitude and latitude are required to define any point on it. Right? Now I'm going to show how that's a lot of rubbish in a while. That is complete and utter mathematical religious nonsense. It's like it's so far outside of reality, right? To say that the surface, the curved surface of a three-dimensional object is two-dimensional. That's just ridiculous. But I'll show in a few minutes how that is absolutely destroyed with such ease, right? And I've shown it in the past as well. But I have a specific reason for making this video. Key details regarding the dimensionality of a sphere. 2D surface versus 3D object. A distinction is made between a sphere, the 2D surface, right, the 2D surface, and a ball, the 3D solid volume contained within. Right, within should give you all you need to know that this whole thing up here is rubbish, and this statement here is rubbish. But anyway, the factors are within. Then you have here locally flat, really? Small sections of a sphere approximate a flat 2D plane. No, they do not. There is absolutely no such thing as an approximate two-dimensional plane. You cannot have a two-dimensional plane. An approximate two-dimensional plane. It either is two-dimensional, right? It either is a two-dimensional plane or it's not, right? There is no if, buts, or maybes. There's no ins or outs. Right? It's not like what's that famous one? You can't be almost pregnant. You are or you're not. Right? It's like you can't. That's just ridiculous. Then you have degrees of freedom. Only two, as you can move in two independent directions, e.g., north-south and east-west. Right? Well, that's stupid. Well, you can't. You can go, northeast, right? Which is using those directions. But anyway, don't matter. But none of these exist on the globe either because they require a flat plane as well. They require two-dimensional flat plane. The thing they're trying to say the surface of a globe has, or of a sphere has, right? So, consequently, they're trying to say the globe Earth has a two-dimensional surface. It's, you know what I mean, for coordinates, and it's nonsense. Anyway, I'm going to pull all this complete and utter malarkey apart in a minute. So I'm going to come over here a second. I'm not going to click on these links. I'm going to read out a little bit of what they say. Why isn't a spherical surface three-dimensional, right? A one-dimensional object has length but not area. For example, a curve on the plane or in the space, blah, blah, blah. So that's not really hitting where we need it to be. They're going to try and bullshit, right? Is the surface of a sphere two-dimensional or three-dimensional? The surface is from Quora, anyway. They're not a great source, but I'll use them just for this. The surface of a sphere is two-dimensional. This is because two coordinates are sufficient to describe, right? It's like the language itself should tell you you're being bullshitted by people who either intentionally are trying to bullshit you or people who are bullshitting themselves and then trying to bullshit you, right? It's complete and utter horse manure. And then you have Wikipedia sphere. Mathematicians consider a sphere to be a two-dimensional closed surface embedded in three, right? How could it be two dimensionals embedded? It can have a two-dimensional equatorial plane through its center. Yes, a sphere can have that. You can slice it in half and have a two-dimensional plane through its center. That's fine. That plane is two-dimensional, right? You can even take a slice of any of these, right? What they call latitudes on a sphere, right? Which can't go on a sphere, but anyway. You can take a slice of any of them and you can take that slice and say, yeah, underneath there will be a two-dimensional plane. Grand, right? Mathematically can do that, but there's no way the surface of this is two dimensions. But anyway, we'll carry on. as I said, I'm coming back to this in very short time. So, is the polar coordinate system a two-dimensional grid? Yes, the polar coordinate system is a two-dimensional coordinate system that defines points on a plane, right? That's, I don't need to read on from that. Points on a plane, right? That's all you need to know. There is no plane surface on a sphere. It doesn't exist. Only inside it, not on it. Here is, right, a polar grid system, right? Polar coordinate system. There you are, right? It's that's what it is. That's how it works. 2 dimensions, a point in 2 dimensions. So you'll have azimuth and you'll have distance from the center. This is like the origin, right? That's what you'll have. So it's an angle, right? That will involve 360 degrees, and you'll have a distance from the center, right? That will be a point. Next is the XY grid a two-dimensional grid? Yes, the XY grid is a two-dimensional grid, commonly known as the Cartesian coordinate plane. Plane. Don't need to go any further. Don't need to read out everything else. Plane, right? A 2D plane. So we've established that both the polar coordinate system is points on a plane, right? And the XY grid is on a plane, right? Here is an XY grid, right? Then we get to here. You see, this is part of the absolute killer for the globe. They try and mess with this, right? But what this here is a polar coordinate system grid system, and this is an XY, right, coordinate system. Both of them are two-dimensional, and they both work with each other perfectly. Now, I'm not talking about mutating this to make it look like that, or mutating this to make it look like that. You can overlay this origin point onto this, and they will, any point on that's shown on the polar coordinate system will have a point on the XY Cartesian coordinate system, and vice versa, because they both use this axis, right? And you can lay those axes over each other at the origin points, and any point on this grid will be showing up as a point on this grid. You don't need to mutate one and turn it into the other, or vice versa. None of that is necessary. They work in absolute tandem. That's how they work. That's why you can place any two onto a map or anything else, and they will give you the same coordinate point. Just use the grid as that's meant to be used. You have both of them on a map, and they'll both give you the same coordinate point. You can just use the two systems, whatever, if you want it. Now, I'm not saying they do that, but mostly maps will have just the XY. But you can put either one, because they work in tandem. They're two-dimensional. Now remember that. They don't mutate one to make the other work. They don't do that. One works independent of the other, and they both work together. Right? So just to show, here is a polar coordinate system, right? Here it is. Here is a point here, right? You have A, B, C, and D. There, right? Now A, B, and D are on the grid, or on the axes. Sorry. C is the point, right? So C is the point. So this would be an azimuthal situation of 360 degrees, and then a distance from the origin out to this point. That's what gives you C, right? Now, if we change the grid, right, to XY, there is your XY point, right? So that would be XY, so it would be length and breadth, or so they try and say sometimes horizontal and vertical, but that's when they're referring to XY, but that's not correct, because it would be the Z would be the vertical, because the Z is when you're adding a Z in or for elevations, that would be a vertical. So this is a plane. This is length and breadth on a plane. So how you'd read this is you go positive X and first, and then positive Y, right, or whatever. So so that would be positive X7 and positive Y5, right? If the point was down here, you'd have down here you'd have a negative Y, and over here you'd have a negative on this negative X, right? Doesn't matter. Point is, that's how. Just easy coordinates. point being made is that this box here, this point here, doesn't have to change. It never has to change its position. It never has to mutate to go from this grid to this grid. There's no mutation going on between the two of those. Watch it. It never changes. This grid doesn't have to mutate into this one, and this one doesn't have to mutate into this one, right? That doesn't happen. They just can overlay each other, no changes to each other, and work perfectly hand in hand, right? So next point, right, as I promised earlier before we go on, right, so this nonsense about how the surface of a sphere is two-dimensional, right, and you find your point, you find the point on the surface of the sphere with 2 dimensions. No, you do not, right? First of all, you will have, this is a tangent, right, mathematical tangent to one point on the surface of the sphere, right here, and you will have a measured drop from the tangent. So this is a measured drop, this red line here. So that would be on a globe an elevation change, as well as whatever other elevation changes that would exist if the Earth was a globe. This would be an elevation change because this would be a measured drop from the tangent, because they would be measuring, right, things. The whole thing wouldn't work, but hypothetically, I have to say hypothetically, because that's the only way it would work. But they'd have to use it, let's say a surveyor would have to use a tangent, not a horizontal. This wouldn't be a horizontal, this would be a tangent. There'd be no horizontal, no vertical, because there is no parallels. This line here would be parallel only to another tangent at the bottom of the sphere. But if there's a tangent here, then it would be 90 degrees to it. So there's no parallels, and all the zeniths would be diverging from each other. Like this zenith here from the center point, that would, if it came out through here, and this one here, if it came out through here, they're diverging from each other, and everyone all in between. So there is no parallel horizontals, there is no parallel verticals, meaning that horizontal and vertical cannot exist on a sphere. It's just, if the Earth was a globe, there would be no horizontal or vertical. They have to be constants, and they must be parallel to each other. So, but if you had to pre-assume and hypothetically make up some fantasy in your brain, you could try and say, well, a surveyor could use a tangent plane, right? But then there'd be a measured drop from the tangent, because this would be actual Earth that's dropping below that tangent over a distance of, and a drop of close to 8 inches per mile squared. So straight away, that straight away destroys the claim that that the surface of a sphere is two-dimensional. To further absolutely annihilate this complete and utter bullshit gaslighting claim, we have the truth, which is there isn't a point found on the surface of a sphere with 2 dimensions. There is a third dimension from its center internal point. That is the third dimension, as they will be taking azimuthal, right? Mathematically, it would be an azimuthal around in 360 degrees to a point, and then it would be a right angle triangle to a point on the surface of the sphere. Then, right, so you need that center point. So the latitude and longitude they will try to put on it, but I will go to next, right? That is absolutely useless without having the center point and the third dimension of the center. So then it is not, the surface of a sphere is not two-dimensional, and you cannot find your position on the surface of the sphere with 2 dimensions. You require a third dimension. There is no two-dimensional spherical surface. That is mathematical gaslighting, and whether it's either self-bullshittery by the mathematicians, or they're outright, straight out trying to bullshit and gaslight you. And don't allow that. There isn't 2 dimensions to find a point on the surface of a sphere. There is 3 required, not 2. And there is a measured drop from the tangent. There is no two-dimensional spherical surface. Now, moving on, right? Not really moving on, but moving on to the next part, right? Is the latitude and longitude grid a polar grid? Right? Yes, the latitude and longitude grid is a 3D spherical form of a polar coordinate system applied to the globe surface. It says out, but it's not a globe. So, is the polar coordinate system a two-dimensional grid? Yeah. Yes, the polar coordinate system is a two-dimensional coordinate system. So if that's a two-dimensional coordinate system, how can it be on this? This is not a polar coordinate system. This, what they have here, is a complete travesty. It is a hijacking of reality and a hijacking of a two-dimensional grid, right? And they're trying to place it on the surface of a sphere and then use a third dimension that they're trying to put in, that they're trying to kind of brush over and not really make that totally obvious, right? To try and make this absolute mathematical rubbish work. Now, it does work mathematically, but it is not reality. None of this is reality. None of this globe's nonsense here. That's not reality. Converging lines, latitude lines and meridians act as rays from a pole converging at the north and south poles. Parallel lines, latitude lines, parallels are concentric circles centered on the polar axis. What they're talking about is slices, so they're parallel only because the slices are parallel. The latitude lines are not parallel. The slices of the sphere are parallel, right? You can't have curved parallel lines, right? You can't have circles. You have concentric circles only. You can't have parallel circles. And here we are, angular measurements. Unlike Cartesian grids, it uses angles, latitude, north, and now it's north, south of the equator, longitude, east, west of the prime meridian to determine location. Right? Angles from where? From the center. That's the third dimension. Right? That is the third dimension I spoke about. Right? Here we are. While it functions as a polar system, it is specifically referred to as a geographic coordinate system. They're making shit up. There is no such thing as a geographic coordinate system, right? That's on the Earth. The Earth is not a globe. This is not what it is. This is not a polar system. This is a made-up system a makey-uppy system that they're trying to pawn off as a polar coordinate system. That's all they're trying to do, right? This is mathematical only. It is not reality. I just want to go on here a sec. So, latitude and longitude grid laid out flat. That's the question I asked, right? Here is what I got. I'll just show you a bigger version of it. This is what they give you, this XY grid. But that is not, right, even though that is an XY grid, that is a mutation of the latitude and longitude grid. Now, this XY grid, not only is it two-dimensional, right, because it has to go onto a map. See my last video for that. But not only is it two-dimensional, right, because they have to put it onto a map, but it mutates the positions in relation to each other of the land masses, even on a globe Earth. It mutates it, right? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to take this, which is the correct layout of the latitude and longitude grid. Never mind the land masses underneath, that's incorrect. They're incorrect, like Anton south of the equator is definitely incorrect. If you look at the stretchy size of Australia and some of Africa and South America, and you have Hawaii and Tahiti. They should be in the same time zone here, and they're not. So that's all. You see my last video because that connects all to that as well. But ignore the land masses. It's the grid. This is a correct polar coordinate system. This is the original one. This is the one that we use with Earth. This system here. Gives us time zones and all the rest of it. This is the correct system. For them to turn that into this, right, they've got to, right, make all the longitude lines parallel, right, and make all the latitude lines parallel, right? So they're not concentric circles anymore. They're now parallel straight lines, and the longitude lines are not diverging from a center point in the north. They are now all parallels. But to do that, they have to mutate the positions of, even for a globe, they have to mutate the positions of the land masses. Now, I said, as I went through earlier, here is it? You don't have to mutate to go from polar to XY or XY back to polar. There is no mutation required. You do not. It's not required to mutate this to get that to become this, or vice versa. You don't require that. The points stay the same. Nothing changes. If both of them are placed on a map, regardless of whether the map is correct with the land masses, whatever, the point is that you can lay both of those coordinate systems over that map and use both of them without mutating anything on the map. But they've got to completely mutate this system to make that system, and that's because they're trying to. This is what this is a cylindrical layout of the globe. So first of all, they hijack this grid. They make all the south ends of this grid meet underneath the north, right, making a sphere. Then they flatten it out and roll it out. Sorry, then they make a cylinder out of it and roll it out and make this. But this is not a correct conversion from polar to XY. This is a mutation of both. Because not only are they not properly using not only are they not using polar, I'll just go back here. Not only are they not using, a polar grid on a sphere, because it can't be, because it's a two-dimensional plane grid, right? Not only are they not doing that, but when they're trying to come up with turning the latitude and longitude grid into a flat surface, or laying it out flat, right, which is the only way it is laid out, they can't even lay it out for you correctly. This is what they give you. This is what Google and whoever else gives you. They give you this complete and utter bullshit map that is wrong. Not only are the time zones wrong here because Australia stretched out, but when you do this also shows you all the time zones are completely wrong. So they put this grid on so many different maps, down to small sectional maps up to this big universal transverse Mercator map, right? And it just distorts everything. It distorts the north, it distorts all the directions, and it distorts the time zones. So the time zones are this is the correct layout of time zones. Never, as I said, it's the land masses underneath are wrong for correct layout. But the grid is correct. It lays out as 24 time zones. That's what it is. Each one of them are a time zone. In reality, there is 3 right behind across the 32nd degree latitude in the United States. There is 3 time zones. In Australia, a place of equal size in reality to the United States across its breadth on the 32nd degree latitude south. There is only 2 because Australia actually fits within these 2. It doesn't stretch outside of it. So it's not going to cross 4, it's going to cross 2 in reality. Right? Totally proven the Earth is flat. Right? Even admitted by people like Will Duffy. Point being is that they must mutate things, and then they're trying to say that this, right? They're trying to make you believe that this is that, and that this is the flat version of this. It's ridiculous. Now, if what they're claiming about the surface of a sphere, if that was true, 100 million %, right, that is a 2-dimensional surface, then there is no reason why the whole of a globe can't be placed onto this without distorting the positions of the land masses and distorting it from a polar grid, right? This should be able to be placed underneath that, right? And all the land masses and everything be correct if the surface of a globe is 2-dimensional. Now, we can use these grids in reality with maps and different things like that, right? Now, unfortunately, they try and mess around with the latitudes and longitudes on the maps, but you can't use them. The point being is that if the globe Earth is real and the surface of a sphere is 2-dimensional, then you will have no need to change this. You will be able to place the whole globe onto this and there will be no distortions whatsoever. But here is the best they can come up with, which completely distorts everything. Right? So if what they say was true, then there would be no distortions when you place it onto a grid like this. But there is distortions because the Earth is not a globe. You can't place, as I showed in my last video, you can't place any landmass from a globe onto a flat surface, right, without distorting what came from the globe to that. But what we see on the flat surface of a map, whether it be Australia or anything else, what we see there, right, once you have a correct map of that particular country or landmass, not a world map, you end up with that exact what has been measured. There's no missing area in between, etc., etc., etc. But when they're trying to move Australia from a globe and place it onto a flat plane map, what happens is that they have to remove spherical excess, and all they're doing is removing non-reality. Point being is that this is a 2-dimensional grid. You can place, in reality, you can place, if the Earth was a globe, you could place all of the globe onto this 2-dimensional grid without any distortions. As I said, I'm not talking about this complete and utter rubbish. I'm talking about a proper. If it was really, if that was 2 dimensions and this is 2 dimensions, then there should be no problem. But this is not 2 dimensions. This is 3 dimensions, as I showed. This is 3 dimensions. It cannot be placed onto a 2-dimensional plane. It can't be done. You cannot do that without distorting all kinds of stuff. So, point being is that the surface of a sphere is not 2-dimensional, right? And you cannot use a 2-dimensional coordinate system for the surface of a sphere because you require a 3rd dimension. Now, to try and bullshit you and gaslight you, it can't be done, right? In reality, a correct world map could be placed onto this. If this was corrected, right, the land masses underneath the grid here was corrected, you could place this whole thing, right, or you could place this straight onto the top using the XY here, right, straight onto here, right, and everything would work perfect. There would be no need for any distortions. Everything would be right. But you can't. But if the Earth was a globe and has a surface that's 2-dimensional, then there should be no problem with doing that, right? Because what they're saying, if they're saying the surface of a globe is 2-dimensional, they're saying it's flat. That's the only way to describe it. But that's what they're saying. It has length and breadth only, right? But that's not the truth. So can they do that? Can they place the globe Earth onto a 2-dimensional plane without distorting it? No, absolutely not. Because the globe Earth doesn't exist. If it existed and was real, that wouldn't be a problem. It would only be on that, because that's what 2 dimensions is. This is not 2 dimensions. This is not 2 dimensions. This is 3 dimensions. That's why level, right, what they call level on a globe, doesn't exist. You can't have a curved level, because that requires 3 dimensions. Level is 2-dimensional. You cannot have a 3-dimensional level. There's another video I'll link down below. This is ridiculous. They're just gaslighting people and saying things like, oh, well, we call this other system the geographic coordinate system. No, it's the bullshit coordinate system that you're trying to say that we use to travel the Earth as a globe, but the Earth is not a globe. That's what it is. There is no globe, right? Because if there was, as I said, and it had a 2-dimensional surface, then you could place it onto this. The whole globe could go onto that and there'd be no distortions. No distortions, right? And as I said, not talking about this because this has distortions. Loads of distortions. So, anyway, that's the end of that. I think I made my point about this, whatever the point was, about this stupid globe. Thanks for watching.